Okay, so today we're getting into something that I think is super important when we talk about, medication and drugs and all that. And that is risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, or as most people probably know it, REMS.
Yeah.
So we're going to really unpack what exactly REMS are, why they even exist, like what's their purpose in keeping medications safe after they, hit the market, and kind of the ins and outs of how they work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really key part of drug development.
Hmm.
Looking at the regulatory landscape, what happens to drugs once they're on the market. And what's so interesting is that even after so much scrutiny of drugs before they're even approved, there's still this need for ongoing risk management. And that's where REMS comes in.
Yeah, that's right. So we all know, I mean, hopefully everyone knows, that drugs go through these super rigorous clinical
Yeah.
trials, right? To make sure they're safe, make sure they actually work, all that stuff before they get approved. But, our sources are pointing out that even these, like the most intense, in-depth trials, they have their limitations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's, one of the things that the synopsis kind of point to is this, inherent limitation in clinical trials where you have a finite number of people. You're testing in a very controlled setting over a relatively defined period of time. So, sometimes issues like rarer side effects that only emerge with much wider use or much longer periods of time of use.
Hmm.
These might not actually show up until after the drug's already approved and been used by lots of people. And that's, I think a really critical part of why we have these programs for post-approval monitoring of drug safety. It's so important.
So, if a safety concern pops up after a drug's, out in the world, then what happens? How do the mobile watchdogs step in? And it sounds like that's exactly where these RMS programs come in, right? It's like the FDA and the drug companies, they work together to create these plans for managing risks.
Yeah, and that collaboration is a key part of this, right? It's not like, the regulators are like breathing down the neck of the drug companies or anything like that. It's really more of a proactive approach to addressing potential risks associated with a particular drug. And of course, making sure that patients are still benefiting from the medication and that, the benefits still outweigh the risks.
Right. So REMS programs aren't, just like one size fits all, right? Like there are different elements to them. There's this thing called ETASU. So that stands for Elements to Assure Safe Use, which sounds like the real, the meat and potatoes of what a REMS program actually is, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. These are the specific steps, the actions, the procedures that either patients or healthcare providers have to follow to make sure a drug is used as safely as possible. And what's interesting here, it's not one size fits all. There are a ton of different types of ETASU. For example, a REMS could say that only doctors with a certain kind of specific training or certification can prescribe a particular drug.
So kind of like you need a special license to, prescribe that specific medication. Like if it has a, potentially serious side effect or something.
Exactly. And there could be other ETASU that require the drug only be dispensed in certain healthcare settings, maybe
Hmm.
a hospital or a specialized clinic where there's expertise to manage any potential complications.
Hmm.
There could also be, patient registries where data on patients taking a drug is collected over time and used to identify patterns or emerging safety concerns.
So that's like building in a system to, monitor for any sort of trends or problem.
Absolutely. And sometimes REMS also involve mandatory patient monitoring or testing. So this could be, like regular blood tests or assessments, all designed to catch potential adverse effects as early as possible, really building in those safety checks for the patients.
That's so interesting. Okay, so that gives us a picture of ETASU. Now, another part of REMS is, communication plans. And how do these play into safety?
So communication plans are all about getting information to the healthcare providers that are prescribing a drug and, of course, to the patients that are actually taking it, making sure that they have everything they need to use the drug as safely as possible. And one common example is the development of medication guides.
Like the little pamphlets that come with your prescription.
Yeah, exactly. Those leaflets outline, the risks associated with the medication, how to use it correctly, what warning signs or symptoms to look out for. It's about patient empowerment, really. And communication plans can also involve direct outreach to doctors, letters, educational programs, online resources, all of that. It's kind of a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah, I see. So making sure everyone is aware of the risks and knows what to do. Makes sense. Now, our outline also mentions monitoring requirements, which I think is, different from the patient monitoring we talked about under ETAS.
Oh, yeah, that's a really important distinction. So While ETASU might include monitoring of individual patients, the kind of broader monitoring requirements of a REMS program are more focused on evaluating how the whole program itself is working. So this involves tracking things like the number of adverse events reported for a drug, making sure that prescribers and patients are actually following the ETASU, and making sure the communication strategies are actually, getting through to the right people and being understood.
So it's like monitoring the whole program, not just the individual patients.
Got it. Now, our sources, I noticed, they don't really give us specific cases of, like named REMS programs. But the general principles we've been discussing, I feel like, really resonate with the broader things our sources talk about when it comes to drug safety, right?
Oh, totally. For example, there's a lot of discussion about drug metabolism, like how the body processes drugs. And sometimes there's a risk of, interactions between different drugs.
Mm,
And it's easy to see how a drug with a high risk of serious interactions might require a REMS program, with really specific prescriber training, very clear warnings about which drugs to avoid.
hmm.
Or think about bioavailability, right? Like the importance of taking medication correctly, at the right time, with or without food, whatever it might be, to ensure proper absorption.
Right, right.
That all underscores why a REMS might include very precise instructions on how to take a drug. It's like everything we've learned about how drugs are made, how they work in the body, how they interact, all of that comes together to determine, like, do we need a REMS program for this drug? And if so, what should it look like?
Exactly. Yeah.
So who is actually responsible for putting these programs into action?
Well, the primary responsibility for implementing and adhering to a REMS program lies with the pharmaceutical company that's marketing the drug. They're the ones who have to set up the systems for the ETASU, distribute those communication materials, and carry out all the required monitoring.
And what about the regulator, the FDA? Like, they don't just set it and forget it, do they?
Oh, definitely not. No, they have a super active role in overseeing REMS programs. They're constantly reviewing data submitted by the drug companies, assessing whether the program's actually hitting its goals. And crucially, they have the authority to require modifications if it's not working as well as it should. That could mean adding near ETASU, changing the communication strategy, ramping up the monitoring, lots of different things.
So it's a really dynamic process, always evolving, always being adjusted. Sounds pretty complicated. Yeah. And speaking of complicated, our outline also mentions some of the challenges with REMS. And, I mean, just intuitively, you can imagine, right? Like getting everyone on board, doctors, pharmacists, patients, following all these rules, that's got to be tough.
Oh, absolutely. It is. That compliance piece is huge. Making sure that everyone from the prescribers to the dispensers to the patients themselves are all adhering to those requirements.
Mhm.
That's a major challenge. Think about it, right? Like making sure that every doctor prescribing a particular drug has completed the required training, that patients are, actually sticking to their monitoring schedules, that kind of thing. It takes really robust systems and constant effort.
And I bet it's hard to really pin down, like, how effective a REMS program is in preventing bad outcomes.
Oh, yeah. That's a huge one.
Yeah.
I mean, we can track things like, certain data points, but linking a reduction in risk specifically to the REMS program can be really tricky. I mean, there are so many factors that could be influencing a patient's health, but, at the end of the day, the goal is that these programs offer an extra layer of safety.
Yeah. It's interesting how, like, all of this circles back to, the very beginning stages of drug development.
Yeah.
Like we touched on earlier, those preclinical trials, clinical trials, that's where we start to get an understanding of a drug safety profile.
Yeah, totally. All that knowledge that's built, from those very first experiments in the lab, all the way through those large-scale human trials, it all informs our understanding of what the risks might be. And that ultimately determines whether a REMS is needed and, what it should include. It's all connected.
So it sounds like REMS programs, they're really a critical safeguard, especially for certain medications that might have unique risks. And it's this collaborative effort between the regulatory agencies and the pharmaceutical companies. And it's an ongoing thing, not just, set it and forget it. Constant monitoring, constant adjustment.
I think that's a really good summary. And it highlights that balancing act, right? Making sure that medications are as safe as they can be, while also ensuring that patients who need them can actually get them. It's complex.
For sure. And it really makes you think, with all the advancements that are happening, like in data collection and analysis, things we've talked about before on this show, could those things, I wonder, play a role in making these REMS programs even more effective in the future? Something to think about.
Definitely.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.